Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the system design intro discussion. Today I want to talk about the REDCAMEL approach for designing application programming interfaces or APIs. What does it mean? How does it relate to system design? Those are the kind of things I want to talk about today. And this is the first in the engineering and TPM talks, right? So who is this for? This is for technical program managers or TPMs, product TPMs, um, system or engineering program managers. I know at Facebook they're called product TPMs, at Amazon they're called, and Google they're called technical program managers, and Thales they have system or engineering program managers. It's also relevant to engineering leads and software engineers that want to understand um, a new way to design APIs, if you like. What am I going to cover? I would look at the requirements, the framework for the requirements, the framework for design considerations, the frameworks for API models, and also evaluation and latency budgets. This is also relevant to people that have interviews coming up. Something that people do not seem to realize is that when you go for an interview, even if it's in exactly the same team, the same role, you need to do some preparation up front, right? So this is also important for those people that have interviews coming up, but it's not the main aim. I've seen people all over the internet and YouTube that do focus on that area. For me, I'm really interested in being able to share knowledge, learn knowledge, capability, skills, which is essentially what knowledge creations 1000x is really about. Okay? So, taking a step back, we know that designing an application program interface or an API is a complex task. Okay, we can't take that away, right? There is no universal algorithm that exists to model what an optimal pipsy squeak API for a system is or would mean, right? So typically it requires thorough analysis, it requires you to understand what is your user requirements. You need to start with the customer and work backwards so that you get all the nuances for how to delight your customer. And also, you have to have an understanding of the overall workflow of your system, right? When you identify your requirements, that allows you to make the right design decisions or different design decisions, such as what architectural style to use, what data format, what protocol, what version of the protocol, etc., 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 right? So for the REDCAMEL, what it essentially stands for is RE stands for requirements, DC stands for design considerations, AM stands for the API model itself, EL stands for evaluation. Of course, you have to take a step back and be sure that your approach is actually going to pass the first hurdle, right? And as one of my previous bosses who came into Amazon from Google would say, fast was his favorite feature. Thank you for that. So let's look a little bit more into, let's double click on requirements per se, right? So the RE or REDCAMEL stands for requirements. And essentially here, what we want to do is we want to identify the functional and non-functional requirements of the API to be designed, right? So this helps us identify the functionalities we need to address when designing the API. We also mention or look at what are the prerequisites, right? So what concepts would the learner have to know before he can design the API? I'll always typically try to talk about some of these things. And then to be specific, in terms of the functional requirements, right? What you're looking for here is you're looking at what is the API functional requirements. Okay? Typically, we focus on this in the model phase, and I'll come to that. And the non-functional requirements are the things that the system has to do to make the API function as expected. Okay? And then prerequisites, I've already explained. These are sort of like the concepts that you need to understand to actually make sense with your system design or your API. Under DC or design consideration, something that we look at is, it's really the technical news, right? The technical meat. We want to make some technical decisions based on the services involved in a system and the client interaction with them. So typically for design considerations, we would look at the overview of the design, one snapshot design, see that as the base preliminary design, and then the workflow. How do we expect it to fit together? And then if you imagine this at the top of the funnel, as you go down into the funnel, the next thing you want to look at is you want to look at the API architectural style, right? So do you want to use REST? Do you want to use SOAP, right? And here we want to look at between the client, the API gateway, the backend server, what kind of architectural style we use. And sometimes you could use one for one transmission flow and another for the other, okay? Then in the data formats, moving down further into the funnel, you want to look at what is the format for exchanging data between the different entities. For example, do we use JSON or do we use XML? Do we use binary or any other data type, right? Then finally, we want to consider which protocols are best. And their versions, by the way, right? So there's HTTP 1.1, HTTP 2.0, and I'll come into all those details for HTTP 3.0, right? And it's not about using the latest and greatest, because sometimes there's no supportability in different clients for those. So you need to make a nuanced call based on what the objective you're trying to achieve with your customer is. The AM in REDCAMEL stands for API model. And here, what we want to do is we want to define sort of like multiple endpoints that are necessary to perform the different operations to meet your functional requirements. I'll say that again slowly. We define multiple endpoints to perform various operations to meet functional requirements, right? Obviously, we build from the previous phase, which is design consideration phase, where we've presented each operations request and response structure. We have identified what and how to access the endpoint corresponding to those operations. Then here we exchange the data between the client and server in the formats that we decide on, or we've decided on in the previous phase, the design and consideration phase. So typically, what do we look at here? We look at what's the base URL for our API, and what are related endpoints for each service. It's also good to present the good practice, to present the essential data entities that can be a part of the request, that can be a part of the response, or that can be a part of both, okay? And then for data entities, we highlight the different data elements required for specific design problem. This is key, right? And I'll come to this. We have foundational design blocks that help us build, see them as Lego blocks, but ultimately each customer pain point is likely to be different, or else you can reuse what already exists. Something that's also a good practice is it's good to correlate, identify what status identifies. Let me say that again. It's good to understand what status code are relevant for your API model, right? The RFC, Internet RFC, has already defined a bunch of different codes, whether it's on the client side, the server side, for information, success, failure, etc. And being able to identify what you expect your API to deliver when it fails is good to show that you've clicked all the boxes, you've thought it through, and you're not just winging it. Okay, so that's API model. And last but not the least, in terms of REDCAMEL, is ENL, right? At the end, REDCAMEL, it's showing, yep, evaluation and latency budget, right? And typically for design problems, you want to decide whether, well, not decide, you want to check whether the techniques that you've decided on through the requirement, design, consideration, and API model phase are likely to achieve your non-functional NFR requirements. Okay, your non-functional requirements. Typically, these NFRs are around scalability, availability, low latency, security, etc. And then you also want to check that your latency budget, that your design will meet your latency budget. Okay. Yep, that's good enough. So something else that I want to just briefly talk on before I end this specific video is what I alluded to previously around foundational APIs, right? So different applications offer a specific set of services, right? So for example, both YouTube and TikTok will use the search functionality, right? It's not just Google that does search, they will both use the search functionality. So to design such a service, you need to include all the functionalities that are required for each service, right? So instead of trying to repeat the functionality each time, if you memorize these foundational or building block design problems, another long-winded word, then you already have your primary building block, without which the service is incomplete, right? So you have different components that can help you build on top of that to build your API, right? So the reason why I'll do videos on these first is because once you're able to understand these foundational problems, understand the services around them, then it becomes a plug and play. It becomes more modular. And in most of the companies that I've worked for, you can check me out on LinkedIn, modularity is a key thing, right? Modularity, reuse. So no one wants to pay for something that already exists. So being able to understand the foundational services and orchestrate around them is key. Now you're wondering, with all these ugly pictures up here, what are those foundational services? So the first I would say is designing a search service, right? So if you're able to understand how a search service works, then you can demonstrate quite quickly how an API gateway can interact with multiple services to obtain specific search results. Do you understand? And it's also possible to do it with ads and recommendations based on a search query, right? If there's time, I'll also talk about, how you can paginate an API or perform versioning by giving, an example of filtering functionality to a search service, right? Now, almost every advanced design problem, think YouTube, Google Maps, Uber, even chess being, uses search functionality, okay? Then the next service that I think is important is file service, right? So typically a file API will enable a user to store different media. Now, anyone that has not been under a rock for the past 20 years will know that we're always storing things. We're storing images, we're storing videos, we're storing documents, we're storing software, we're storing text, we're storing whatever, whether it's into cloud storage, on-prem storage, on-device storage, we're always storing things, right? And those things, we want to access them on demand. Okay? We don't want someone to tell us, no, you can't see that picture from your wedding from 5 years ago. You want to see it when you want to see it. You want to see that picture of your girlfriend or your boyfriend or your child or your nephew or your parent. We want to see that on time, in full. No questions asked, right? So, if you consider TikTok, for instance, the TikTok API will use a file service to upload its videos to the TikTok platform. YouTube Shorts, YouTube videos, they'll use a file service of some sort to upload videos to their platform. So being able to understand how that's done, design one for yourself, is a good skill to have, I think. And then next is designing a comment service, right? We like our likes. Hopefully you don't give a lot of dislikes, a thumbs down. But in the comment service, right, what you do here is, you want to design an API, right, that interlinks the different components in a comment system and directs various operations. So typically for a comment system, you're going to create, you're going to retrieve, you're going to delete, you're going to edit, So being able to understand how this can be done, have this at your fingertips, again, becomes sort of like a building block. And then the last, and not the least, and it's debatable for some, is a pub sub or a publisher subscriber service, right? And typically what a pub sub building block or problem does is that it shows you how to opt or how to design an event-driven architecture either, right, over a request response architecture. And I'll go into what these different architecture types mean. Don't worry about it, we'll go into it at some point. And the reason why I feel this service should be a building block is that it typically represents, an advanced example of implementation of an event-driven architecture. And the reason why it's key is that when you add that MQ, message queue, you can decouple your microservices, right? Something that Netflix has really popularized, right? Microservices. So you can do that once you have, a pub-sub service. And typically it also helps in notifications as well. Notification is a key thing in API designs. So yeah, trick question. Do you agree that designing a search service, designing a file service, designing a comment service, designing a pub-sub service are foundational API design problems? Let me know in the comment section down there, or else I'll just serve it to you. But I don't want to waste my time. I don't want to waste your time either. So yeah, let me know. I believe the ending is everything. This is my first engineering and TPM talk. And yeah, I think I need to get some water for myself. Okay, take care everyone. I will speak to you soon. Thank you. Bye.